Good afternoon, and welcome back to the conclusion of INSA's The New IC, Empowering Women and Engaging Men. I now like to introduce INSA President Suzanne Wilson Heckenberg.
Thank you. Welcome to Sisterhood of Spies, the final session of our week-long New IC program. This has been an extraordinary week, and we have been delighted by the positive feedback this event has already generated. And I can think of no better way to close out the week than with this panel of fearless women leaders. We hope to make this as interactive as possible today. Please submit your questions through the question box on the right side of your screen. Feel free to identify both your name and your organization when submitting your questions. And while this afternoon setting may be a little more relaxed, this is a reminder that this program is on the record, open to the press, and will be available on our website on Monday. And finally, I would like to thank all of our sponsors for their critical support of this program. We could not deliver this kind of premier programming without the support of our sponsors and partner organizations. Now it is my pleasure to welcome Teresa Shea, Vice President, Codex, Cyber Offense Defense Experts at Raytheon Intelligence and Space, who will introduce our moderator this afternoon. Teresa, over to you.
Thanks, Suzanne. Raytheon Intelligence and Space is excited to be part of bringing to close a great week of empowering women and engaging men, the new IC, with the best hour yet. We are long-standing supporters of INSA's mission to bring the community together for these unique conversations that really get to the heart of the issues for our nation. For 40 years, INSA has played an indispensable role in bringing together leaders both in the private and public sectors to support the vital work of the intelligence and national security communities. And it's a privilege this afternoon to be associated with this distinguished panel. And I'm especially excited to see the diversity at the highest levels across the IC. At Raytheon Technologies, when we say that we're stronger together, it's more than just a hashtag. It is really a call to action. It's a call to value the unique talents, perspectives, and experiences of every single employee, because that is what sets us apart. Conversations like the ones we're having this week are so important because bringing that diversity to the table leads to the outcomes that are creative solutions to our hardest challenges. And with that, it is my distinct pleasure this afternoon to introduce our famous moderator, Suzanne Kelly. Suzanne is the founder, CEO, and publisher of the Cyber Brief, the go-to source for nonpartisan analysis on both national and international security. And of course, my favorite column, the illustrious Dead Drop, that's full of the latest gossip and fun news on security and intelligence and comes out every Friday, so check it out. Before starting Cyber Brief, Suzanne had a distinguished career serving in numerous key roles at CNN, including executive producer, news anchor, and intelligence correspondent. So she really is the perfect moderator. Suzanne, over to you.
Teresa, thank you so much. I may be super famous, but I'm a little technologically challenged, as we've seen. So thank you for your patience. What a nice introduction. It's such a pleasure as well, not only to be working with the amazing women who have contributed and are contributing to intelligence and national security, but also to be able to get that introduction from you in honor of everything that you've done for the security of the country. So thank you to Teresa and thank you, Raytheon. You know, we are so honored to be here with you today to be presenting the Sisterhood of Spies. It's a focus on real life women of the intelligence community who are coming to the forefront to discuss their careers, to discuss chipping away at that glass ceiling that we've all experienced at one time or another, and to talk about their outlook for a future intelligence community that is as diverse as the nation that we're protecting. We were originally preparing to do this presentation for South by Southwest to try to really educate people in the public about what women do in the intelligence community. But we are so honored to be able to do this with INSA this year. So we really appreciate it, and we're looking forward to a very lively discussion. You know, we have seen this time and time again, from Jason Bourne to James Bond to the Kingsmen. Men are always conjured up as our collective lead in this Hollywood vision we have of the spy community, but it is not the reality. I am so proud to be joined here today by Dr. Stacey Dixon, Deputy Director of the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency, by Ellen McCarthy, Assistant Secretary of State for Intelligence and Research, and Teresa Smetzer, the Vice President of National Security Programs at Salesforce and the former Director of Digital Futures at CIA. So what is a spy really? Since the birth of our country, women have collected and shared intelligence for the sake of national security. For our definition today, they are researchers, linguists, analysts, briefers, and scientists. They are also mentors, leaders, advisors, role models, and teammates. And we should never forget that they are mothers, wives, sisters, daughters, and friends. They are women who often give up a lot to give more of themselves to the national security mission. So let's get to know them better. First question, I'd like to ask each of the women on our panel today to share details of how they got where they are and how their career started. Dr. Dixon, let's start with you.
Thanks, Suzanne. It's pretty simple. When you see once the slides show up, you've got me in the middle in a second, coming up at the age of 3, wearing a fabulous sunglasses and a hat. And this was not me being a fashionista. This was sort of my first attempt at a disguise, because the day before I had run into a glass door and I actually had a bruise on my face. So I learned some important lessons that day, and not just that you should not just run into glass doors or glass ceilings, but if you do, brush yourself off, put on a smile, maybe a fabulous hat, sunglasses, or both, and then just get back out there. I'm a native Washingtonian, and after high school, I left DC to go off to school and more school. But I really enjoyed my time in California at Stanford, at Georgia Tech, as well as at the University of Minnesota. But my mascots there were a tree, a bee, and a gopher, of all things. And after all that schooling, I never envisioned that a fabulous job did not await me at the end. But I finished up right at about the recession of 2002. I took the chance to go over to South Africa and a wonderful rotation with the Rotary Foundation, and did a group study exchange in South Africa for a month. But I came back to absolutely no job and no immediate prospects. But it was one of the best things that ever happened to me, because it allowed me not only to figure out who I was, but to get introduced to the intelligence community, where I've been gainfully and happily employed ever since. I've worked for several of the intelligence agencies: Central Intelligence Agency, National Reconnaissance Office, the Office of the Director of National Intelligence, the Intelligence Advanced Research Projects Activity, or IARPA, and my current employer, which is the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency. But I've also taken the time to work on Capitol Hill at the U.S. House of Representatives Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence, where I was a professional staff member. As an engineer and a scientist and a manager, I've had experiences leading teams to build satellites, to build sensors, and to build budgets. I've led teams that brought automation to analysis and brought crowdsourcing to problem solving. I've worked with academia and industry, as well as other government agencies, to deliver some amazing capabilities that either gave the U.S. an intelligence advantage or sought to keep the country safe. In my spare time, I volunteer with youth and the elderly. I work on my public speaking, and I travel the world, although not right now, to discover wonderful beaches and zip line courses. Experiment in the kitchen, and one of my favorite pastimes is spending time with my 2-year-old niece, who the other day said to her parents, "I, an astronaut," after she put on her helmet that they had gotten her at the National Air and Space Museum. This is the same little girl who 6 months earlier put on a trick-or-treat bucket on her head and said hat. So looking at her develop just reminds me of all the great things that are coming with artificial intelligence. But if artificial intelligence could learn as much as this little child, we'd be in a great place. I am currently the Deputy Director at the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency, where our mission is to know the Earth, show the way, understand the world. And I have an opportunity to lead a fantastic 14,000 person workforce to really be able to deliver intelligence. I've had great mentors and sponsors and bosses along the way of every gender, of every race, and even in the very male-dominated STEM fields and in the heavily male defense intelligence enterprise. I have had a great opportunity as an American woman of African descent to become the second in command at an intelligence agency. My goal is to make sure that I deliver on what I promise, that I represent my agency well, that I inspire others to commit to public service, which is a wonderful thing to do, and then create diverse and inclusive environments. And for all of us to then work together to keep the country safe, technologically advantaged, as well as secure and prosperous. So that's a little bit about my career, and I will turn it back over to you, Suzanne.
Thank you so much, Stacey, for that. Ellen McCarthy, you're the Assistant Secretary of State for Intelligence and Research. Tell us a little bit about your journey to get where you are today.
Thanks, Suzanne. Well, let's start from the beginning. So I grew up in the great state of Maryland. And, you know, in the early days, my dream was to own a golden retriever, have a house on the Chesapeake Bay, and potentially run Proceedings magazine. And for those of you who are familiar with Proceedings, it's a magazine that supports the U.S. Navy. And that's really what I thought. That was the end game for me. I graduated from the University of South Carolina, go Gamecocks. I earned my master's degree from the University of Maryland. And I made my way as a waitress and a bartender, a skill that I believe I could fall back on even today if things don't work out. So we can go to the next slide. I married a handsome nuclear submariner named Gordon. That's kind of amazing because after years of living and working for the Navy, I had really sworn off Navy men, go figure. But he was different in all the right ways. And we've been together for 24 years. Our son attends Syracuse University. He's my little slice. Our daughter is excited to start at the University of Texas, Austin this fall. Welcome, Horns. I'm so proud of my beautiful family. We love going to Redskins games. Even though my husband is a Dallas Cowboys fan, I have no idea why that happened. I love dogs. This is Angus. He's really only half a dog. I love wine. I love traveling. I love music. I'm truly blessed to have a great family and wonderful friends. But who am I professionally? So I started as a circulation manager, which meant I delivered newspapers, and ultimately became a reporter at the Capitol newspaper in Annapolis, Maryland. I also worked at the Institute for Defense Analysis. This was the Reagan era, and I was working on programs for the Strategic Defense Initiative. I moved into government to become an all-source intelligence analyst at the Office of Naval Intelligence, and then at the Atlantic Fleet down in Norfolk, Virginia. These really were the good old days. It was the Cold War. Who would have thunk the Cold War would have been the good old days? I directed intelligence operations for the United States Coast Guard, helped move the Coast Guard into the intelligence community. Then I moved to the Pentagon and I worked at the Office of the Undersecretary of Defense for Intelligence. I did policy and strategy and HR. I honestly never saw myself as an HR lady, but I actually learned that I really am. And for those of you who work for the Department of Defense and you're familiar with the Defense Civilian Intelligence Personnel System, don't blame me. I built it. Don't blame me. In 2008, I had the most amazing opportunity to work as the president at the Intelligence and National Security Alliance, INSA. It still remains one of my favorite jobs. I'll tell you, serving in an association that includes companies in the private sector and the public sector that want to provide support to the intelligence community gave me a whole new perspective on what we do. In 2012, I returned to government to lead daily operations for the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency for 3 years. Then I moved back to the private sector as the president of Nobles NSP. And in January of 2019, I proudly became the Assistant Secretary of State for the Bureau of Intelligence and Research. If someone had told me back in the days when I was thinking about that golden retriever in the house in the Chesapeake Bay that someday I'd be running one of the 16 intelligence agencies, I would have thought they were crazy. But I have to say it's been a most amazing run. But who am I really? Well, my first car was a 1972 green Buick LeSabre convertible. It was handed down to me from my grandmother. Most grandmothers did not drive convertibles in those days, but this car was the coolest, as was she. It was smart, fast, and provided freedom, just like her. She was timeless. She was smart. She was beautiful. She was adventurous. This is going to make me cry. At 79, I raided her closet. She was my idol, and this was the car. My first concert was Queen. In junior high, I lied to my parents. Actually, my mom is sitting outside watching this right now. Sorry, Mom. That concert changed my world. The things I heard, the things I smelled, and I never heard or seen these things before, and I never looked back. So along the way, I've begun to wonder, what role do I play? Who am I? Do I have ADD? Do I need beds? Because I've had so many different jobs, and I've had so many different experiences. I've had so many different hats. But if it's ADD, or if it's I had to do all those things to get where I am today, what surprised me the most was that being a woman made me different. I always viewed challenges as opportunities for areas to focus on. It was never really, I never thought that, it was any different for being a woman, because I had such amazing male bosses and such amazing male supervisors. So any challenge, I really viewed it as an opportunity to work harder. So if I was sitting in a meeting and I was the only woman and nobody was directing questions to me or engaging me in dialogue, I just presumed that I wasn't smart enough, that I had to work harder. Only later did I figure it out. It was really about the time that I was looking to get promoted to the senior ranks. It really wasn't that I wasn't smart enough or I wasn't working hard enough. It really was because I was a woman. And I realized that network just played a very important role in moving along to set that next step in your career. Men have been building and using networks forever. And so really, I realized that this was my time to also build that network. So that's what I did. And I'll tell you, it was some amazing women. Tish Long, Fran Townsend, Suzanne Heckenberg, Megan Jaffer. I mean, these are the women that really helped me move on to that next level. Not only did they mentor me, but they actively engaged on my behalf. And I'm forever grateful. And it was because of these women that I actually will describe to you probably the most proud accomplishment. And that is to be one of the founding members of the Amazing Women in the Intelligence Community. And we are a group of women that we're not a 501c3, we're not a business, we're just a club. We started with 10 or 40, we're now over 1,000. And these are women that just are working together and are agreeing to help one another and to move one another up. It's amazing over the course of the last 5 years what this group has done. And I'll tell you that I'm very grateful to the women who helped me make this move. And now I'm just so grateful to be a part of this group and help give back. So to sum it all up, I've had a very diverse career. Navy, Coast Guard, private sector, State Department. I'm probably not what most people think of as a spy, but I'm certainly so proud to be part of the sisterhood and proud to be helping make the sisterhood stronger. So there you go, Suzanne.
That's excellent, Ellen. I couldn't ask for a better explanation and a better kind of calling out of how the journey sometimes feels like we have ADD in the sense of moving through your career with different components. So thank you so much for sharing that. Teresa, you created like a legendary reputation when you were at CIA. You ended your career there as Director of Digital Futures with the agency, and then you moved into the private sector. So you have experienced what many people think about during their course of their careers, which is gaining experience in one foot in kind of each camp, so to speak, especially as we look at the future and both government and the private sector are working so much more closely together now than ever. Can you give us a sense of sort of your journey, how you got where you are and the experiences you've had?
Sure. Thanks so much, Suzanne, and thanks for the opportunity to be here today. In many ways, the decisions we make determine our life stories. So I'd like to tell you about 5 decisions I've made and how that's really impacted who I am. The first decision was to major in chemical engineering in college. I grew up in a very small farm town in central Illinois. My dad was a professor of veterinary medicine. And so, of course, I went at University of Illinois. So, of course, I went to University of Illinois. I started in zoology and then chemistry before deciding on chemical engineering. And in many ways, that really served me very well in my career, combining problem solving, innovation with a strong technical foundation. A bit serendipitous, but that's the way life is. After working for a few years, I returned to graduate school and went to the University of Texas in Austin to get my master's in chemical engineering. And while that was a great experience, along the way, I fell in love with Austin, Texas. So that's where I live now with my husband and 4 grown kids. And Austin will be a continuing theme through my story. The second decision that I made that's noteworthy was to join CIA for a career of public service. I worked briefly in industry after graduating and decided that wasn't for me. Wanted to move to the East Coast. A friend had suggested joining CIA. To be honest, I couldn't imagine why anybody would have joined the government, but I thought, okay, I'll give it a try. And sure enough, I got accepted, and within months, I was hooked. I loved being an intelligence analyst. I loved the problem-solving nature of it. I loved all the smart engineers and scientists and analysts that I work with. In fact, Sue Gordon was in the office next to me when I started, so we've been lifelong colleagues and friends. But more importantly, I think I realized intelligence has such impact, and that's what really hooked me more than anything else. My first assignment at CIA was as a technical analyst covering Middle East chemical weapons programs, way before anybody cared about such things, but it was just really a rewarding experience. Along the way, I got married and had 2 kids, which was awesome. And after many years, I decided to quit. I needed more flexibility to be with my kids, and I felt like that's what I needed to do. And so my third decision was basically to become the CEO of my own company. So I quit at the highlight of my career. I was a member of the Senior Intelligence Service. I was doing very well, but my daughter needed me. She was having trouble in school. And so I went into Tiger Mama mode, and I found a job in the private sector. I found a house. I found a school for my kids that I thought was really suited for what my daughter needed. And I quit. And in those days, that was kind of unusual. But it turns out, ironically, my daughter was just fine. She went on to get a degree in communications and minor in PR, and she's a senior account executive with a major international public relations firm. But coincidentally, the move to the private sector served me incredibly well because I learned all about business. I learned about government acquisition. I learned about innovation technology and how to bring that to bear on problems that the national security or the intelligence community had. I worked for a small startup, and then I worked for a bigger company before deciding to start my own company. And literally in my study in my house, I by myself started this company with a first contract and Jasma Consulting, and it proved to be incredibly successful. Happened to be after 9/11, so it was kind of a target-rich environment for innovation at that point. But so that company was then acquired by LMI, a great company. I worked with them for a few years and then decided to retire the first go round. But that really moved to Austin for the second time, continued to consult to small businesses and invest in angel startups, which was fine. That led to my fourth decision, which was to return to government, CIA, as a government innovator. And I became the director of digital futures in the newly created Directorate of Digital Innovation. Our mission was to accelerate the identification and adoption of industry-leading digital technologies and processes, and then work with organizations internal to figure out how to apply that technology to mission problems. It was a phenomenal job. It really was the culmination of a lot of stuff I had done, and it was a startup within government, and I loved it. Part of it was I worked with really awesome people, including probably most notably Andrew Hallman, who was my direct supervisor and the first director of the Directorate of Digital Innovation. So that was great. My fifth decision, which is really where I am now, is I retired from government again. I'm not very good at retiring, apparently. In April of last year, moved back to Austin for the third and hopefully final time, and ended up taking some time off to sort of chill before starting a position with Salesforce as the Vice President of National Security Programs. I say digital trailblazer because that's part of Salesforce's persona and their sort of culture, but it really is sort of the sum of everything I've ever done, is to really help organizations in the intelligence community think about technology and innovation in different and interesting ways, with a company, Salesforce, that embodies the values of trust, customer success, innovation, and inclusivity, which really is who I am. So I've been with the IC or involved in the IC for 30 plus years as an analyst, an innovator, a technologist, and as an executive. And I've learned a few things along the way. One is identify and leverage mentors. I can't even tell you the number of people that have mentored me, either personally or professionally, over the years that have been critical to my success. Second, be flexible and take risks. You know, my career's been much more of a jungle gym than it is a straight line, to quote Sheryl Sandberg, and lean in. And I've always looked for jobs where I could learn something new, where I had impact, and where I thought they were interesting. And so I encourage everybody, take risks. The third is really nurture relationships and networks. And to play off Ellen's point about AWIC, those relationships become so important across your career. And I think it's particularly so for women, but you just never know when those relationships might help you, or you might help them, or how things might your circles tend to come back together and again. So that's it for me.
That's excellent, and excellent advice as well, Teresa. And we'll remind everybody of those things to remember at the end of this as well, because it's fantastic advice. And I think it's so great to hear the personal side of what each of your journeys has been like, because they're different. And I think it reminds all of us that there is no one path to get somewhere, and certainly to get to a point where you're making a huge difference in the national security community. So I'd like to ask each of you now, if you could kind of share maybe a real life story of something that happened to you during your career that kind of shows the reality of what working in the IC has been like for you. And I think, Ellen, would you mind going first and leading us off on this one?
I would love to. You know, some of you have heard this story. It's my favorite story, but it's worth telling again. So I started as a Soviet submarine analyst. You know, I would love to say that I was out there hunting Soviet submarines, but my first job really was I was tracking the scrapping of Soviet submarines, which is not very sexy. So I literally spent my days reviewing imagery of submarines that were being chopped up. But if you think about it at the time, it kind of made sense, because how do you know what's actually operating if you don't know what's not operating? We didn't have the data then that we have in these days. So it actually was a better job than I thought. Literally my first month on the job, I was asked to brief a certain Navy captain. Some of you probably will know who he is. I'm not going to say his name. But he was very interested in going to another country and purchasing a very old Soviet submarine. You know, it might as well been the Monitor or the Merrimack. It was that old. And my boss told me that I was supposed to go brief him and show him that we knew everything about that submarine that we needed to know, that there was no reason that he needed to fly to this very exotic country and get that submarine, that we were fine. So I studied every inch of the submarine. To this day, I could describe the waste disposal system on that submarine. Because this was my first briefing. I had a job. I went to do it. I stood up in front of this Navy captain, and I had view foils, for those of you who remember what those were. This was the days before PowerPoint. And the introductory slide was in all capital letters: Ellen McCarthy, M, uppercase C, uppercase C. Before I could even launch into my briefing, he said to me, "Wait a minute, Ellen." He said, "Do you normally spell McCarthy with 2 capital C's?" And I said, "Well, no, usually it's a lowercase and an uppercase." And he said, "You tell me why in the hell I should listen to the rest of this briefing if you can't even spell your name." I was brand new at all of this. I was shocked, but actually I never showed it. So there's one lesson. I never showed it. I just said, "Thank you, Captain. I will make it a point to change that the next time we brief." And I moved along with my briefing. Here's what I learned from all of this, besides the fact that he may have been a not very nice person. Your customers are not always going to like what they have to, what you hear. As an intelligence officer, there's very many times you're going to tell your customers things that they don't want to hear, but you got to keep doing it. That's our job. If you're prepared, you can overcome just about everything. And because I knew everything about that submarine, that little snag did not stop me. I went on and described everything about that sub. Good bosses will have your back. I'll tell you, at that moment, when it was all over, my boss went back to him and said, "You know, that was just not very professional." And that the Soviets actually had waste disposal systems on their submarines. I mean, that was very much a surprise to me, but I learned it from that moment that they actually did. So there's a lesson that actually applied back in the late 80s, but they're lessons that I've carried forward to this day. So there you go, Suzanne.
And I think a great example, because we all encounter people during the course of our careers who would love to throw us off just enough to confuse us and not let us do our job. And I think that was a brilliant way to handle it, and not always easy. Teresa, what about you? Share a real life story that kind of defines what it's been like to work in the IC.
Sure. So fairly early in my career, I got a new assignment as the technical analyst for Middle East nuclear weapons programs. And this was before the fall of the Soviet Union, before the Gulf War. So those accounts were important, but didn't have the same priority and emphasis that they do today. I thought it was great because I loved putting together all the pieces and figuring out what was going on. But I really realized pretty quickly that writing collection requirements against nuclear weapons was hard because there's so many concepts technically that didn't really translate into straightforward, simple requirements. So I had the opportunity to go work in CIA's Directorate of Operations as essentially work with the ops folks to think about targeting and recruiting and reporting on information related to Middle East nuclear weapons programs. So if you could imagine a really smart person who goes to a top-notch school, they get double degrees in international relations and economics, they speak multiple foreign languages, they've lived and worked abroad, so have the cultural awareness, and CIA goes after them, recruits them, they come to work at CIA, they go through training, they go out to their first assignment, and they're told, okay, one of your accounts that you have to collect against is Iran's nuclear weapons program. It's like a new language. They don't even know the terminology, and it's really hard, right? So, but if you partnered that person with a strong technical analyst who could figure out creatively, how do you go against that target? What kind of people should we look for? What sort of things might be of interest instead of looking at a set of requirements? You know, it might seem really obvious today because all the centers, mission centers at CIA collaborate around analysts and operations officers and targeters, and it's all integrated. But in that day, it wasn't. Ops officers did their thing, and analysts sat in the corner and analyzed what we got, and we had very little contact. So it was pretty, transformational. The other side of it was most of the case officers at that point were men, very traditional, not too keen on seeing a young woman engineer, analyst nonetheless, come in and tell them about creative ways we could go after that target. So it was a really fascinating experience for me. So break, towards the end of that assignment, I get pregnant with my first child, and I'm due in 6 weeks, and it happens to be my 30th birthday. I come into work. These guys had a surprise baby shower / birthday party. I walk into the conference room, they have this cake and balloons, and here's all these guys sitting around the room with presents for me. I was blown away, and it was then I realized, okay, I've won these people over. I've actually made an impact. I've helped them, and I just will never forget that image of those guys, crusty old case officers sitting around with their baby shower gifts for me. But really what I walked away with, more importantly, was the value of diversity and inclusion and bringing together different ideas and different people with different backgrounds and experience and cognitive models, and what you could do to solve problems if you really think that way all the time. And so that idea of diversity and inclusion has always stuck with me because of that experience.
Yeah. Teresa, I think that also highlights a couple of points. One is really that there is no better way to bring people together than having a common mission and a common goal. And yeah, we all tend to set a lot of things aside when we know that there's something larger than us at stake. And I think that's a great example of that. Cece, what about you? Is there something that you can share with us that sort of brings together what your career in the IC has been like?
Oh, absolutely. And I'm going to focus on one of my research and development assignments. But when I was at IARPA, I had the pleasure of working with scientists and engineers of a variety of disciplines. You could start out from something as diverse as social sciences all the way to physics, neuroscience, electrical engineering, biology, linguistics. It was an organization that had everything. And they used to launch prize challenges to try to crowdsource ideas for intelligence challenges. And one of the ones that I remember distinctly was trying to get someone to make a 3D model out of a 2D, so flat satellite image of somewhere on the ground. One of the most successful people participating was a student at a university who did medical imaging. And he was able to apply the tools that he used for medical imaging to the satellite imagery to great effect. And his approach was so different, but really competed really well with the approaches that were more traditional. And what we all learned from this, not only was this a great way to get more people involved in solving hard problems for the country, but because we were able to not exclude people who were doing things that we thought were so different, we were able to really benefit from his skills. Another lesson was in the prize challenge, you're not picking a single company that gets all the money. You're picking basically, you're putting out a prize, and any number of smaller companies or smaller organizations can then participate and deliver a solution. So sometimes throwing a lot of money at a small number of companies is one way to deal with it. Or you can throw a small bit of money at a lot of different companies, and you just never know what you're going to come up with. And so much like what Teresa said about innovation, is the power of innovation is really making sure that everyone who has ideas can come to the table and bring those ideas. And it really is that diversity and the conclusion of everyone to be able to come up with these solutions that you just never would have thought. And by collaborating with the brightest minds from academia and industry and government together, you really can deliver the capabilities that we need to deliver not only the intelligence mission, but that national security mission that we're all trying to really accomplish. So that's been a memory that I followed with me, but being able to talk about it is probably something that surprises a lot of folks, but there are organizations that do work that really do rely on the public and things that aren't completely secret. So that was also a nice surprise from the time there.
Yeah, I think that's excellent. And, I first met you when you were, I think, deputy director at IARPA, and then you became director at IARPA. And I was just absolutely fascinated by IARPA's mission and the whole outreach that was required in order to be successful there. It really gives you a whole different look at the IC. Thank you so much for sharing that. All right, we have a ton of questions coming in, but I have a third and final question. So everyone sit tight. I'm seeing them roll in here, and they're great questions. We'll get to them in just 1 second. But first, we have a third and final question because we're in a Friday state of mind, ladies. We talked off the top about how Hollywood has conjured up all these images and men are always the heroes. And so I thought it would be a little fun if we put on our director's hat today. And I asked each of you to give us a sense of what you'd like to see in Hollywood. What story would you come up with that really focused on women and diversity and having something a little different in what the world is seeing about the intelligence community? So Teresa, let's start with you.
So I would do a limited run television series about 4 women who started CIA 30 years ago, very diverse backgrounds and experiences and skills. And the show is about how their careers are sort of interwoven to accomplish the mission. And it's not just about sort of typical women's issues of harassment or equity. The show really focuses on hard issues like work-life balance and higher level decision making. How do you engage in higher level decision making? And what calculations do you make in showing your authentic voice, which is sometimes a challenge for women in particular. So the show would be all about how their careers and those issues play out over time. They would start as friends at the beginning of the show, but one would break off due to some sort of conflict related to their careers. But I think that would be way more interesting. And I have to credit one of my best friends and colleagues and mentors, Carmen Medina, with the idea, because she and I were talking about it, and I just love that idea. So that's my idea.
I love it. And there's great storytelling and relationship building and all the things that we've talked about today that we all know women are, but we've showed how they play into our careers. I think that's a great show. I'd definitely watch it. Dr. Dixon, what do you think? What would you create?
So I'm all about technology in action. So I would want a show that did for, basically, if you think of Hidden Figures and what that did for math, and you think of the TV show CSI and what that did for forensics, it totally introduced a new generation of youth to the exciting things about STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math. And so the show that I would create would take a little bit from Q from James Bond, a little from Lucius Fox from Batman, and a lot from Shuri from Black Panther. And you would have these really interesting intelligence challenges that require some sort of technology. And the show would be all about the problem they were trying to solve, how they solved it, the outcome, and then what actually happened when it was applied in the field. And the protagonist would be a combination of nerdy and funny and inspiring all rolled up in one. But it would be just super action packed the entire time, but showing a lot of great tech along the way.
I love it. Oh my gosh, I'm like hooked for both of those. All right, we got one more. Ellen, what do you think? What would you come up with that would grab people's attention and be a little bit more realistic?
So I'm showing my age, but I love the Jetsons. And so I would want to develop another show that had the same impact that the Jetsons had in predicting the future. And for those of you who don't know who the Jetsons was, it was this amazing cartoon, just incredibly brilliant in color. It was sort of the compilation of, it was the space age, and it was sort of the distillation of everything that the space age had for America in terms of great promise. And I know for a fact that it really, it inspired so many young people to go and study space, study engineering. I mean, it was just such an inspirational program. So that resonated with me. And so I really would like to do another version of the Jetsons that resonates with policymakers and warfighters and intelligence experts. The star, I realized, I did the math, and Judy, who was the daughter in the Jetsons, would be about 78 years old right now. So maybe her daughter or her granddaughter would be the head of the Jetsons. But something that was just that bright, that impactful, and showed what the future was. Because if you think about it, just about everything in the Jetsons is here today. So that's what I would do.
I think that was the coolest part of that show too, was just the imagination part. Like, could that really happen? This is the coolest thing. Yeah. It made you want to be a part of it. Okay, let's get to some of these questions, ladies. We have one right off the top from a female superstar in the intelligence community, Susan Gordon, who says, great job, amazing pros, patriots, and humans. For each of you, she wants to know what your best day has been like so far in your careers. She says, just one, don't think too hard. Oh. I think there's a little wink there. So let's see. I'm trying to read your eyes and see who has one already and who's thinking. Teresa, you ready?
I am. I was in graduate school in Texas, and I'd been sponsored by the agency to go back to school. I was still pretty young. And I got a call from HR saying, you got to come back to headquarters. And I freaked out. I thought, oh my God, I'm going to lose my job. I screwed up. I've done something bad. So, okay, I got on the plane. I went back, and I got there. And Bob Gates was the deputy director at the time. And I walked in, and they gave me an enormous amount of money for an award for something I had done. And I can't tell you the anxiety leading up to that. It never even occurred to me, but I just remember, and it involved the director of operations, so something that was doubly unpredicted because I was an analyst. And so that really left such a mark on me the rest of my career, mission impact, and what's possible.
Wow.
I can't tell everybody about the details.
Wow, that's fantastic. Dr. Dixon, what do you think? I keep calling Stacy Dr. Dixon. I should just say, like, for everyone on the call today, we're very casual. We're all okay with it. So apologies. No disrespect.
No worries, Suzanne. Oh, definitely no disrespect there. So this is going to sound really simple, but I'm going to actually say it was today. And the reason I'm going to say it was today is because it's been a tough couple of months with COVID and everything happening in the country. And before we shut down and reduced our staffing in the building, I used to really love riding the elevator because I got to just talk with people, and we would just have these really interesting conversations. And my goal was always to get people laughing or just talking together. And then when I got off and they were still talking, then I knew that I had succeeded. This morning I got in the elevator, and it was just one gentleman, and he said, "You're the deputy, right?" And I said, "Yes." And he said, "Can I give you some feedback?" And I was bracing myself. You just never know. And his name is Dan. And Dan said, "I've worked for a lot of different people." And he said, "You and Admiral Sharp are leaders." And then his floor left, and he got off. And I immediately went, and then we had a meeting with my boss. And it touched me, because to be told that, we were really doing some things that the workforce appreciates was just really wonderful. And there's just such a great team here. And to know that, while there also are critiques at times, but just to know that they're appreciating what they're getting out of us, and that we rank up there with people that they've worked with all throughout their career is just a wonderful thing. So today.
fantastic story. You really do think that leadership is so isolated, but and they don't really get a lot of feedback other than, you know, people's complaints and ways they do it differently and all of that. But to know that you're making impressions like that is fantastic. Ellen, what's the best day of your career so far?
You know, I got to tell you, every day has been fabulous. You know, this has given us an opportunity to reflect, and I have to say, it's been just such an incredible ride. But I'll tell you, you know, I think my best day, I didn't even know it was my best day. It was literally 20 years later. I was working at the United States Atlantic Command. Bosnia was the problem in those days. I was an analyst working on Bosnia. And it was literally 15 years later, I had forgotten about everything we had done with Bosnia. And I'm sitting at a meeting, and somebody walked over to me who was actually deployed and in Bosnia, who said, I want you to know you sent this message out. This is what you said, and you made my job so much easier that day. And I got to tell you, you know, you have no idea the impact you're having on people or what you're doing, because it's just what we do. And I almost cried when I heard that, because I literally had forgotten about all of this. But to know that somebody 15 years ago was very grateful for something that we had done, I mean, that was the best ever. So.
You know what I think is really cool about all the stories that all three of you just shared is that they all focus on recognition, which is something that women do not go to work to get, right? You don't work hard to get it. You focus, you think you don't have time for that kind of thing. You need to remain focused on your mission. But those moments where you take a breath and think, oh my gosh, I really have made an impact. It's amazing that all three of you kind of zeroed in on that aspect of it. And I think it's an important message for younger women coming up to say it's okay sometimes to look back and say, I did a pretty good job, like pat yourself on the back and then get back to work. But I think that's really important. Okay, so we have another question here from Noel Hardesty. I hope I pronounced that right. Please forgive me if I didn't. For each panel member, what is your strongest leadership trait and how do you inspire and encourage others? So why don't we just go reverse order, and Ellen, why don't you lead us off? You're at Department of State. How do you kind of in this environment, in this climate, what's your strongest leadership trait?
I think empathy. I think if you can put yourself in somebody else's shoes, and I mean, I think that's actually, for me, that is the most important trait, because actually it helps you get more out of your folks also, because if you understand what motivates them, and if you understand what skills they have, what strengths they have, and also that they may just be having a bad day. So I'll tell you the flip side of being empathetic is that sometimes you come off as soft. So it's not empathetic to the point of being soft, but it's empathetic of trying to understand what somebody else is thinking and going through.
Yeah, I think that's a great one. Stacey, what do you think your strongest trait is?
I think one thing that served me well is just I'm very calm. So no matter what's happening around me, I tend to kind of show up the same way. And not that I don't ever get upset, but it's not always visible. It's not always readable. And so if people react to that, they're not going to get upset and just frustrated and flustered because of what they're seeing from me. With respect to how I inspire them, part of it is making sure that they know how much I appreciate them, how much I appreciate the skills that they're bringing, the experiences that they've had, that I love not being the smartest person in the room, because there's so much more we can learn from other folks. And so just by letting other people shine, I mean, you let the briefers who actually are the experts do the briefings. That is a very simple way of making sure that people know that you're appreciated, and hopefully that will continue to inspire them to gain those experiences and to share them.
Yeah, I think that's great. Teresa, what do you think?
So I would say it's my ability to see the art of the possible, right? I've always had this thing about however things were, I could see how to do it better with technology or data or whatever. And I think the groups that I've led over the years have valued the fact that I kind of set that vision and set that direction, but allowed them to figure out what that meant and translating that into initiatives. The downside of my strength has always been I'm very impatient, and I don't understand why the system can't work fast enough to implement this stuff. And earlier in my career, it was probably more of a challenge, but it's that realization that not everybody shares your view of the future, and how do you work within the system to get people to change.
That's a really big deal and a really important part of leadership that people often don't sit you down and explain to you.
Right.
Okay, Christina Monaco asks, can you give us an example of a time when you were flummoxed by a challenge and how you leveraged the sisterhood to address it? So we're all here today talking about how important these networks are, and it's sometimes hard to come up with that perfect story in just a moment, but are there examples? Just let's see. Stacy, you ready? Can you think of one right off the bat?
I'm sure I can, but I'm still thinking at the moment.
I can do it.
This usually comes to me at like 4 in the morning. Okay, Ellen, go, lead us.
So I spent some time at the Coast Guard, and it was interesting. When I left the Navy to go to the Coast Guard, it was just before 9/11, and all my friends at the Navy said, "Why are you going to the Coast Guard? They don't shoot anything." Well, the reality is, so the Cold War was over, 9/11 was coming. The Coast Guard was actually a pretty cool place to be post 9/11, and it's because they have this law enforcement mission. But you know, law enforcement and intelligence are kind of they're interesting cultures. You know, they're very different. And yet, you know, post 9/11, law enforcement intelligence had to work much more closely together than they ever did in the past. And we are very, very different. And so I am working with our law enforcement counterparts we called it Operation Drydock. And it was about, we learned that merchant mariner documents were being used as legal identification. So people potentially were getting visas and passports using a merchant mariner document for which they weren't supposed to be used. So we had partnered with the FBI to go back and do this very quick review of like the last 20 years of merchant mariner documents. And it was a mess because you had law enforcement folks who they were very focused on grand jury, getting the data, you know, sending people to jail, and the intel folks were just trying to serve up the intelligence. And it was tough. I mean, tensions were hot, and it actually got very personal. But I will tell you, it was actually a few of my female friends. It was the Joan Dempseys of the world, who I was able to call upon. Even Fran Townsend, I mentioned her. She was somebody who had worked at Justice and then came over to the intel community, who was able to help me make the connections with the folks who had level heads, read John Pistol, who were very, very supportive of this effort, understood what needed to do, and helped guide me through what could have been just this disastrous event. So don't be afraid to pick up the phone and ask for help.
Oh, that's a great story. Anybody else want to weigh in, or I've got a couple other great questions here as well. Okay.
I have one example that is noteworthy. I had written a very provocative assessment of Iraq's nuclear weapons program that was I thought, very well researched, and because I knew it was provocative, and ties into Ellen because my state INR counterpart was ballistic. She did not agree with the assessment, wrote sort of letters explaining why I was completely wrong, and it really shattered my confidence. And I remember going out to a bar or something, you know, that night with a group of women, none of whom knew anything about the substance, but I kind of walked them through what happened and said, did I screw this up? Was I, you know, and I remember walking away thinking, okay, it's not me. This is part of the process that we have to learn to respect and understand and figure out what it means and how to collaborate. But I really was in a bad place thinking I had screwed up until my friends said, no, this is just the way it works, but really stuck in my mind.
Mm-hmm. I think it's a great question.
I think I don't have an exact example I can tell the specifics of. I think of many cases of trying to make sure that I understand, you know, who I'm going to be presenting to, who I'm going to be briefing some information to, and reaching out to my networks at that location, many of whom happen to be women, to be able to get that scoop before I'm in the room with the individual. If there's something I'm trying to achieve within the agency, my first thought is, okay, who do I know in that area, in that office, that I can reach out to? So a lot of times it really is that longer Rolodex. I'll date myself a little bit there. That longer network of people that you have relationships with who happen to be now in places where you need to have contacts and being able to reach out to them. So there's many places where both the sisterhood networks as well as the larger networks really just help you get the work done.
Absolutely. You know, it's funny that theme, I'm sure all of you have noted, has come up a couple of times during this conversation, and you just don't know who's going to have that skill set or the mindset or just whatever it happens to be that's needed in that moment. So it is so important to keep that network of women and men both together. So we have one more question, and then I'll come to you all for any like a very quick speed round of closing thoughts. So I'll warn you ahead on that. This is a great question about something that's been on all of our minds over the past couple of months, most of us for our whole lives. And this comes from Deetta Kitchings, and this is directed for Stacy, but I think anybody can weigh in if they want to. She says, in this pivotal moment in present racial climate, as an African-American woman, it inspires me to see trailblazers such as all of you, especially Dr. Dixon. She is Black girl magic. What are you committed to do to sponsor and support women of color to rise to your ranks and beyond? I think that's a great question.
No, I definitely do. And so from part of coming back to the agency in this role and being able to figure out where I can make sure that we don't have practices, we don't have policies that are disadvantaging anyone. So there's a piece of it that's just making sure that everything is fair and that all opportunities are being equally made available to everyone in the workforce, regardless of gender, ethnicity, any other characteristic. With respect to specifically, I happen to have a number of mentees who are African American women. My mentees aren't particularly diverse right now because I have a lot of women who are like me who are reaching out to me for support. So not that I turn down anyone, but I just happen to have a lot of African American women who are looking for advice. And I make time. My staff knows that is something that always fits in my calendar, that we kind of figure out where people want to go, and I encourage them to try to map that out. And so I'm always trying to, no matter how busy I get, to make sure I'm making time for those one-on-one conversations, because I think if someone can learn something from the path that I've taken, then great. But it's something that even after things calm down in the country, and they will calm down, that we don't forget the lessons that we've learned and the fact that we're fighting against biology. Biases is inherent in everyone. And so people are just going to gravitate towards people that are more like them. And we have to make a concerted effort to make sure that we're being equally supportive of others as well.
Yeah. And we can honestly all do better together. I love that message too. Okay, speed round of final thoughts. We have just a couple of minutes left. Ellen, you want to lead this one off for us? What would you like for us to take away from this conversation today?
I think there is absolutely has been a theme, and your network is really everything. I mean, you've got to not only know your job, you've got to be expert at what you do, but you also have to surround yourself with people who don't look like you, who aren't just like you, who can help fill in the gaps. That's critical to your trajectory, and it also makes it just so much more interesting. And I'll tell you, I think the IC is going through an absolutely pivotal moment right now with COVID. And I'm actually very excited at the possibilities for our community. I think that we are now moving into a world where we need the IC more than ever. We need the insights the IC provides, not just in the highly classified realm, but in every realm. I think in the open source realm, we need those analysts, we need those experts, we need those people who are constantly questioning what could possibly be, more so than any other place in government. So I'll tell you, maintaining your network, getting really smart, and loving what you do is so critically important for our country. And I'm very optimistic for the future as the IC makes this next big step. And I think it's discussions like these, and I think it's women like these who are helping preparing those behind us to be able to tackle these next challenges. It's an amazing career. I will tell you that anybody out there who's thinking about it, don't even think about it. Come work in the intelligence community.
Yeah, excellent advice. And find ways to stay connected. Stay connected in INSA and the important work that they're doing. And in those conversations, become a member of AWIC. Get involved with other women who have stories to share and support. We'd love for you to read the cipher brief, but that's purely selfish. Teresa, what do you think? Closing thoughts?
So consider public sector, just to reiterate the point Ellen made. There's so many opportunities, and there are not many jobs where you can make money and also make a difference. Be bold, right? It's okay to go in and out of government and do different things because it just makes you more well-rounded. Don't think about a linear progression. And last but not least, to reiterate Ellen's point again, it's networks. Networks, you have to take the time. It's not some, side thing that's not really important. It's a critical element of all aspects of your career.
Yeah, absolutely. Stacey, would you like to close it out for us? Give us something to continue thinking about after this great session.
Absolutely. I just want to echo the point that intelligence and national security are worthy endeavors. And for those who are watching this who are not involved, You can get involved in many ways, whether coming to work for the government or working for industry that's supporting national security and intelligence. So find a way to be part of the solution, because we're here to help keep the country safe, help keep the country with an advantage, and really be able to deliver the capabilities that are going to allow us to do that. But it's going to take the partnerships. There's nothing that's done without partnerships between industry, academia, and government, as well as international partners. So we understand the importance of that, and we're always trying to build those relationships as well. I thank you for this opportunity. I hope that the intelligence community continues to be a great place for women to work. I intend to make sure that to the extent that I can help that happen, then I'll make sure that I do that. But also, we welcome anyone, because it really is the talents and experience that you're bringing, and we need everyone to be part of the solution here.
Yeah, and thank you so much for that. We have a slide up right now where you can get contact information for reaching out, for following up, things like that. So take note of that on the slide. And I promised this, so I'm just going to reiterate what Teresa said right off the top. Identify your mentors, be flexible, take risks, nurture relationships and your networks. And I don't think that there's a better way that we could kind of close out what's been an amazing day. Suzanne WH, wow, what a fantastic week. Thank you so much for letting all of us be a part of this with you.
And Ellen, Stacy, Teresa, for sharing your stories. And thank you for paving the way for some of the future leaders of the intelligence community who are tuning in today. I'm pleased to be joined now by INSA's chairman, Tish Long. We would like to make a little impromptu toast to the group here. So Tish, I'm going to turn it over to you for a moment.
Thank you, Suzanne. What an incredible week this has been. I would like to offer a toast to all of the great leaders who have shared their stories with us this week, and particularly to the women that I share the screen with right now, to our networks that are so very important. And to all of you here today, thank you for what you're doing. I appreciate it. Cheers.
Thanks.
So in addition, I would also like to thank our sponsors and our partner organizations. Without their support, we would be unable to deliver this kind of programming, and particularly Raytheon for your support of today's panel conversation. If anybody has missed any of the sessions this week, recordings and recaps will be available on the INSA website, so I would encourage you to look at them at your leisure. We will also post a list of all the terrific books and podcast recommendations we have gathered from our speakers this week, particularly Debbie Lee James' book, Aim High. Debbie opened with her keynote and talked a little bit about her book and leadership. But before we go, just a quick look ahead at upcoming INSA events. We have a jam-packed summer, including a July 16th panel focused on the Cyberspace Solarium Commission recommendations for greater information sharing between critical infrastructure operators and the U.S. government. July 22nd, we are hosting a panel on teleworking in the IC, and we also have several speaker series on the books, including guests such as John Felker, Greg Smithberger, Janice Glover-Jones, and Zachary Tyson Brown. So visit our website for details. With that, this program is adjourned. I hope everyone has a wonderful weekend. Stay safe, stay sane, and enjoy your evening. Thanks so much, all.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you to all the staff for just a tremendous week. Well done.
Yay.
Thank you all, ladies.
Good evening.
Bye.